Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Council of One's Babylon 5 review. And this afternoon, we are covering the episode In the Shadow of Za Ha Dum. And with me this afternoon, I've got my good friend Mountains of Elysium. Unfortunately, our friend Classic Comics couldn't be here today, but he's here in spirit. And you'll understand what that means here in a few minutes. And don't know what's happened to Fiona Wolf. I think she's having technical difficulties. Hopefully, she'll show up in the chat or whatever. I hope she'll show up live for us. So, but that all being said, folks, thank you all for being here this afternoon. As always, this is one of the highlights of my week, and it is great to be covering the show with friends and talking about a piece of sci-fi excellence. Elysium, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, as you can see, getting into Christmas spirit.
And we have our third Zod Rider. Calling late.
Hello.
Hey man, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Everybody, Zod Rider's here. Call him late, but never call him late for dinner. So, Zod, it is a pleasure as always to have you here, my friend, and everything. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. We missed you last week, but glad you're here this week.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be here. It's great to be here. How are you doing, Mountains?
Doing great, thanks.
Awesome.
Well, as I was saying, today we are discussing the episode In the Shadow of Za Ha Dum. And man, the world is about to get a lot bigger and a lot darker. But as I mentioned just a second ago, Classic Comics is not able to be here with us today. He's out on deployment and everything, and we wish him well. We'll hope he'll be back next week. But he was good enough to do some pre-recorded commentary, so I'm going to pull this up. We'll listen to his commentary, and we'll do some response to that, and then we'll get into our discussion, and we'll just go from there. So give me just 2 seconds. I will share audio, Chrome tab, share, come back over here, and here we go. And Classic, thank you ever so much again for doing this, but we appreciate it more than you know. All right, here we go.
Okay, so I thought I'd just go over a few of the thoughts I had while watching In the Shadow of Za Ha Dum for the Friday live stream, since I'm not going to be able to be there. Now, I watched the video or the episode and then rewatched it with the commentary, which was by J. Michael Straczynski. So now, of course, we start with the scene where you see all the Narn sort of staggering onto the station. Now, in the commentary, JMS notes that all those Narns you see in the background, there's only about 10 or so of them. They're just kind of going through the doorway over and over again. You know, they're kind of going off camera and then looping around, which I thought was kind of funny. But we do see, obviously, in this episode that the war is going poorly for the Narns. We hear repeatedly about all these Narn refugees from the war that are sort of being herded onto Babylon 5 out of war zones because the Narns are getting their butts kicked. And then in Med Lab, we hear, of course, about how Dr. Franklin is being, Babylon 5 is just being overwhelmed with all these refugees, particularly all the injured being funneled into Med Lab. Franklin is being overwhelmed by that, and we see that.
Oh, hey guys, if at any point you want me to pause so we can comment on anything the Classic said, or if you just want to wait till the end, we can do that either way. So just want to let you know that. So, all right. Moving on.
That he's, sort of exhausted, and we get the first hint of him becoming dependent upon the stems to do his job, which of course is going to become a big storyline for him later. In fact, there's a couple of things in this episode that factor into Franklin's storyline down the line. First is these stems, and then also is the religious issue of him being a foundationist and all that. This is where we get the first mention of that. Now, the term foundationism or foundationist probably is derived from the Foundation novel by Isaac Asimov, which is a series of novels that were sci-fi novels that were published back in the 30s, I believe it was 30s, 40s, and they're some of the modern classics of sci-fi, some of the very early modern sci-fi novels. Also in this episode, we get our first mention of the Night Watch through the character of Pierce Maccabee, I believe is his name. Obviously, the Night Watch with their black armbands are meant to evoke the brown shirts and the Nazis back in the 1940s and other fascist movements as well. Now, the interrogation, I think the interrogation scenes with Morden, I really like the way they're shot. I love how you keep getting that one view of him where you see him sort of straightforward and he's responding to Sheridan's questions. But in the background on the wall, you see him in a profile in another angle at the same time. I don't know, but I really like it. Generally, I just really love how this episode unfolds bit by bit as Sheridan has more and more people confronting him and telling him that he has to let Morden go for various different reasons. Each time a different party comes forward, we realize that Morden is more important than even we realized. I also noted that I thought Christopher Franke did a good job with the score in this episode, complementing the tension that underscores the interrogation scenes. As interrogation, of course, builds an intensity, the music builds an intensity as well, which I thought was good. I really like the scene where Talia meets Morden in the hallway, and of course, you see that shot of Morden, and suddenly, he just is shrouded in darkness. And I just really thought that was really neat. It's a good example of doing a cool effect, but not having to have a bunch of expensive visual effects to pull it off. It was just them changing the lighting. Let's see, and what else? Of course, we also get our first look at the shadows in that scene. It's our first actual visual look at them. Okay, when when Talia slaps Sheridan, I kind of thought it when I watched it in normal speed, but I went back and kind of did it slow mo, and Box Lightner definitely kind of telegraphed that slap a bit. He's clearly flinching and moving away before she hits him. Okay, now the story that Sheridan tells about Churchill allowing the bombing of Coventry to take place to prevent the Germans from realizing that England had broken the Enigma code is most likely a hoax. Now, to be fair, in the commentary, JMS notes that he knows that this is somewhat disputed as being a historical fact, that it may not be true, but he decided, he admits he basically just went with it anyway because it fit the story he wanted to tell better. But this claim that he knew ahead of time, Churchill knew ahead of time about the attack, comes from a book that was published in 1974 called The Ultra Secret, which was written by a guy named F.W. Winterbotham. And he was the leader of Ultra, which was Britain's intelligence section. I think the British military's intelligence unit during World War II. So they were the ones handling the code breaking and all that. And he was running Ultra at the time these events took place. He wrote a book basically about Ultra and about their exploits during the war. And it's in this book that he made this claim. But other people who worked with Ultra at the time, after he put this book out and made these claims, other people who were involved with Ultra at the time came forward and disputed his claims, saying that wasn't accurate. The main argument seems to be that, when they first intercepted these encrypted messages and began decoding them, they didn't have time to fully decode the messages before the attack took place. They had decoded enough of it, encrypted or unencrypted enough of it, that they knew there was a bombing attack coming, but they didn't actually know where it was. And they just weren't able to get that information from the encrypted message before the attack took place, because between the time they intercepted the message and the attack took place, there just wasn't enough time for them to get it done. And people, these same people also noted that he apparently made a lot of mistakes, and there were a lot of inaccuracies in his books. Like, he attributed some actions to the wrong people. He got people's names mixed up, basically arguing he wasn't the best historical narrator. Let's see. Also, another thing in the commentary. Now, JMS says in the commentary, one of the main reasons he cast Ed Wasser as Morden was because when he first met Ed Wasser, he really was taken with how much Ed Wasser reminded him of Rod Serling. And the way he talks, apparently he knew Rod Serling. JMS did. I guess he met him and knew him. And he said Wasser reminded him tremendously of Serling, and that's part of why he cast him in this part, because he thought that sort of attitude and demeanor would suit the part really well. Another thing he mentions is that with the Night Watch, they're part of the Ministry of Peace, and he got the idea of the Ministry for Peace from the novel 1984. And of course, like the idea of, you've got this thing that sounds good, it's, as he puts it, the incremental lie, that you basically start with something that sounds good or maybe is more or less true to sort of sell people on the idea. And then over time, you reveal, you're going to have to reveal your real agenda to them eventually, but you do it sort of stepwise, bit by bit by bit, so that by the time they've kind of got the full picture, they're sort of acclimated to it. It's like the old idea of, if you put the frog or the lobster or whatever in the boiling pot and then you turn it up. If you turned it all the way up to boiling right away, of course, they'll try to escape and get out. But if you turn the heat up slowly, bit by bit, incrementally, they really won't notice the difference that much. And then eventually, by the time they realize they're boiling to death, it's too late. That's all I really had off the top of my head after running through it. I'm sure some of this you guys will probably tackle yourselves. But anyway, good luck on the stream Friday, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
All right. And Classic, if you catch us on the replay, thank you, bud. That was some really, really good stuff. So, gentlemen, thoughts?
He jumped right into it on everything. He covered a lot of stuff. I specifically like the way he, commented on J. Michael Straczynski's casting for Morden. The Rod Serling reference. I've heard about that and known about that one for a while, and I believe that that's completely true, because that's exactly what he resembles. He's like Babylon 5's entry into the Twilight Zone. It is so awesome, and it just fits totally, and it's one of the reasons why Mr. Morden is one of my all-time favorite Babylon 5 characters. So
yeah, honestly, go ahead, Elysium, please.
No, I was just saying he really is up there with Bester as best kind of bad guy in the show.
Yeah, perfect casting. Absolutely perfect casting. So, yeah.
Well, and, a couple of things that Classic hit on. And, guys, we can go wherever you want to with this or anything. I really liked doing that deep dive, or doing that dive into Franklin's belief system, because that is something that has come up throughout the series periodically, is the whole matter of belief and faith and religion and so on. And honestly, he did Franklin's belief system. He said it's only been around for 100 years or so, and what he says in that particular conversation with Ivanova, you get the closer you get to defining God, the further away you get from it. And honestly, I can see truth in that because being a theology student myself, we come up with all these adjectives and so on to describe the nature of God, but yet at the same time, it's difficult to define something that is beyond human comprehension. And what he says is, I have been seeing a lot of reflected gods in the people, in the eyes of dying people or dying Narns in particular. And honestly, I thought that was a really interesting comment or anything, or that Franklin made. And just very quick to the chat, Fiona Wolf, good afternoon, ma'am. Sorry to hear you having technical difficulties. Glad to hear you have you here regardless. Go in, just put your thoughts into the chat, and I will bring them up and everything as we go along, ma'am. And good to have you here regardless. So, fellas, anything along those lines or anything that I just brought that you want to respond to?
It was great to hear, like you mentioned, Franklin's belief system, and I know that comes more to the fore later on. But I think the war has, and the Gropos, he's gone further into his religious belief system, because in Believers in the first season, he was more, like it was mentioned by his staff, was it medicine is your God? And now he's becoming much more spiritual. He started seeing a lot more and is looking for belief beyond the scientific, because I think he is being overwhelmed, and that we see this in this episode where we start to notice him taking stims.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think as things get bad, you realize you have to look for something greater than yourself.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Solid thoughts?
I was just thinking, about what I wanted to add with Dr. Franklin. One of the things that stand out to me with Franklin is we are at this point starting to see the evolution of Franklin on an even deeper scale, because here he is, you get a glimpse into his religious beliefs, and we're going to see, as things move forward, we're going to see different elements of Franklin to where it's going to make sense where the character ultimately ends up with the character, with the character arc. And I just, again, I get, when I go back and revisit, these Babylon 5 episodes, I'm in awe as to how well written the characters are and how much character development is, put into them as well, because it's just fascinating. I mean, because when you go into these Babylon 5 episodes, it's like you're not just getting a complete story. You are getting to know all of these characters on such a personal level. It's like, by the end of it, it's like you completely know them, and you can relate to where they're going and what they're doing. And and this whole thing with Franklin is absolutely one of the most compelling arcs of the entire series. So
yeah, truly. Well, and honestly, for me, this episode was so well written. I mean, there is so much here. Yes. And we could spend a whole hour or more just talking about the whole thing with Franklin and his religious belief, but there's a whole lot more we got to get into. So moving along, we can kind of jump into the main plot. And of course, that's Sheridan and Mr. Morton and the interrogation. And oh boy, it gets, of course, we can't really, I'm trying to remember, was it this episode or next? No, it was last episode where we had the whole Veer with the wave. And then, of course, you've got Veer going to Sheridan going, we're extending a diplomatic immunity to Mr. Morton. And Sheridan's like, for a random traitor? Why in the world are you doing that? And, honestly, I can understand where Sheridan is coming from because when you have lost a loved one, and it has been in such a way that is very traumatic and very gut punching, you're going to go to whatever ends you have to go to find out what happened to them. And you've got a person right there on the station that knows exactly what happened, but he ain't fessing up. And unfortunately for Sheridan, he doesn't necessarily get the answers. Well, he does get his answers, but he doesn't like how things necessarily turned out. So, fellas, if you want to jump into that part of the episode, we by all means can. So, I open the floor, obviously.
No. I think just as I'm mentioning about Sheridan, I was mentioning it to you just beforehand, and I was tweeting out about how this is a great episode during the week, and I geeked out when JMS responded. And he said one of the best parts of this episode, apart from the wave, is seeing how dark Sheridan would go, how far he would willingly fall when the problem was personal, and how hard he would go to fight the other way when lives were at stake.
Yeah, I agree.
And I often thought, how many people on the other side, how many people did dark things out of love, or for some reason, but didn't have a Kosh or didn't have a Delenn to walk them back from the edge, walk them back from the abyss, because it pretty much took a near godlike character in this episode to turn Sheridan around.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Well, and go ahead, Elysium, please.
No, I was just thinking, I believe some of Morden's backstory is similar. He was doing something for his wife or for a loved one, and that's how he ended up in the Shadow's grasp. So we almost see the opposite of how far you could go, and how you got there, and sometimes what it takes.
Well, and the other thing for me is I have to ask myself the question, how far would I go if it was my wife and she had died and I never got to have that closure? And the thing is with Sheridan, he hasn't been able to go through the full process of mourning and grieving because we can assume that there maybe was like a funeral or a memorial service of some sort for Anna, but at the same time, he doesn't get that closure. He doesn't get to see a body. He doesn't get to mourn over a grave or anything like that, per se. And his response to Morden's presence on the station is very visceral. It's very real, and I think it's something that we all can connect with in one way or another. So, fellas, anything along those lines?
Absolutely. I mean, Sheridan's emotional state is, and the way he balances things, via with the command of the station and his role and everything that he's trying to do with what he's dealing with. Ultimately, it's just a testament to the amazing power of these characters. Again, that's what In the Shadow of Za Ha Dum is to me. It's a character study in the most brilliant way, because when you look at basically Sheridan versus Morden, you're seeing both sides of it, and you're almost, one of the things I wanted to mention is I kind of, but back when we did, I was actually thinking about this episode when we were watching at the watch party, when we watched 300, when you had your 300 watch party, and I was thinking of some common elements between Mr. Morden and Xerxes. In a sense, you have Mr. Morden who is willing to give so much to make his case, to make it so that his whole thing is always, what do you want? And the way that he emotes all of this and challenges those who are questioning him on any level, and trying to make it, and trying to make it as appealing as possible. And it's brilliant. And as far as Sheridan goes, I think his responses, of him going dark, it's very very human. And it's something that you can totally totally relate to when you try to put yourself in that position.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So, well, and as Classic mentioned earlier, once Sheridan learns the truth about what's been going on, the fact that the Icarus went to Za Ha Dum, and you see the shadows, and you get this sense of absolute petrifying dread. And Delenn is like, you have got to let him go, because eventually they're going to come for him, and if they do, we're all sunk.
Yes.
We are all screwed if you don't let this guy go. And she absolutely does not pull any punches. And that's one thing about Delenn that I really appreciate and respect, is the fact that she does not pull any punches. The fact that she will
it's all out of fear, though. That's the thing. Like they're not
True.
They know that it's like the shadows are obviously, when it comes to all of these other races on board the station, they're all they know that they don't have an answer for the shadows at this time, which is the reason why they're the way they are. And when and so the idea, the fear of them getting wiped out is very, very real and pressing at that time. Sheridan's not, Sheridan's reacting, human and emotionally, but he just doesn't realize that he doesn't have, they don't have the means at this time to go up against the shadows, and Delenn knows that, and that's one of the great, again, to piggyback off of what you said, that's a great thing, because Delenn is no nonsense, and she tries to come. There's some things about Delenn, though, with me that kind of, there's some things about her that didn't sit well with me initially when I first got into the series, because I just think that part of her character arc is learning to get over the politicizing of everything, and trying to and become and evolving into a more balanced character, and realizing that there are other ways to accomplish things. And you get to see that more and more over the course of the series as her character arc develops. But I, it's like, yeah, we're all going to get wiped out if you don't release Morden. And the idea is, and the reality is that that's absolutely true at that point in the series. I think that at some point, Sheridan really was jeopardizing everyone. But again, that's a very human response. So,
yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Well, and go ahead, Elysium, please.
No, I was just thinking how different, because both Kosh and Delenn, they nearly needed to silence Sheridan for the sake of everything, but they were willing to let him make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird, considering that Delenn had to let Narn practically be destroyed to protect the secret. So I'm wondering had it gone on any longer, would their hands have been forced even though they didn't want to? I couldn't see it happening personally, but considering the stakes, I wonder what would have happened. I know Kosh probably would have had no issue doing it. Or organizing a little accident.
Yeah. But do you think that if things would have gotten to, do you guys think that if things would have gotten to that point, that Kosh would have stepped in and did something? I'm a little bit conflicted, because I think at that point even the Vorlons were frightened of the shadows to an extent.
Yeah. Well, if you consider the fact that Kosh isn't as isolated as the rest of the Vorlons are, he's got interaction with Sheridan, he's got interaction with Delenn. They might be able to reach him and say, look, things are going to start going sideways if you all don't intervene in one way or another, and we are going to need y'all's help. It may not be on your terms or your timing, but we need help now.
But what do you think the Vorlons would have done though? Would they have stepped in and did something to Morden, because they know that that if they would have did something to Morden, it would have been outright war at that point. I mean,
I'm wondering, would they have just done what he did to Jakar later, where he would have broken into Sheridan's mind and manipulated him?
It's a possibility. I mean,
yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, Kosh could vary, unless Morden has. Well, obviously Talia can't get into Morden's mind, but she was able to see the shadows for a moment, just like Sheridan was and everything. But the thing is, can Kosh get into the mind of someone that has been augmented by the shadows? I would say it'd be a possibility. It might be difficult for him, but he could. I would say it was definitely be a possibility, and he could somehow manipulate Morden. Possibly, we don't know for sure. So, but the thing is, the Vorlons and the Minbari are playing a very dangerous game here, because they know what's coming. In a manner of speaking, they know the shadows are back, because we got that flashback where we see Delenn deliver the message through Lanier to Kosh, and Kosh gives the answer. Yes, the shadows have returned to Za Ha Dum. And unfortunately, it's at that same time. Of course, we don't know a time frame specifically as to when the shadows did get back to Za Ha Dum that the Icarus shows up. And of course, the shadows can't let that happen. And obviously everybody except for Morden, and we find out later, Anna Sheridan, were co-opted. And now they're working for the shadows. They're the liaisons, in particular Morden and everything. He's more active than Anna is. She's stuck somewhere in one of the shadow vessels as a central processing unit. But the thing that Sheridan brought up and everything, and I know Classic brought this up, the whole thing with the story about Coventry and Churchill during World War II. I know it may not be completely factual, but the other thing is, even if it wasn't factual, I would imagine at some point the Allies had cracked the Enigma code, and they probably had to make some hard choices. Let the Germans, let the Nazis do their thing and to carry out their attacks, and still not be able to do anything about it without letting on that, hey, we cracked the code. And if they do that, the minute they do that, well, it takes them longer and possibly extends the war even longer than it already was. So, but the Vorlons and the Minbari are in the same boat that the British were.
Yeah, pretty much.
The enemy is back. We know the enemy is back, but we can't do anything because we aren't even remotely close to ready. The Rangers aren't ready. The White Stars aren't ready. We don't have the league on board. Nothing. Nobody is ready for this. And we get that nightmare scenario, for lack of a better term, where I think it's in season 3 where Yvonne sends out emergency transmission and the whole station's wrecked. She's a mess, and basically it's because the past has been changed. And I'll bring this up real quick. Colin brings up an interesting comment here. They certainly went to sometimes extraordinary lengths to hide the source of intelligence for breaking the Enigma. Yeah, Colin, I would agree with that, because that was such a vital part of the war effort. The fact that they could decipher the German communiques or the enemy communiques so easily because they were finally able to crack the Enigma code and everything. And you've got the same dilemma here with Sheridan trying to ask Morden for information about his wife and her death, and all the while he's got everybody coming in saying, hey, doing's not necessarily legal. And then it finally takes, as I think either it was Uzod or Ulysses that mentioned, it was a godlike figure in terms of Kosh that said, learn. Here's what you want to know. Now you know. Now cut him loose.
Well, and so it's because it's like Kosh is giving Sheridan the knowledge that he's going to need to essentially make a different decision. I mean, the idea is though that Sheridan is thinking of everything in terms of human terms, and he's thinking with his emotions, and Kosh knows this, so Kosh is trying to quell that so that things don't go sideways too early. You gotta span this out. They know that they can figure something out in the War of the Shadows eventually, but it's going to take time because, as you said, nobody was ready for this. So you have to do things strategically in order to give yourselves a fighting chance.
I think in the lore of the setting, it was Babylon 4 that caused the Shadows to strike in the previous war.
Yes.
Which meant they struck before they were ready, because the real big war, I think, is 10,000 years ago in the setting.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing and Babylon 4 gave them the military base to be strong enough to hold the Shadows back and keep them at bay before they were ready.
Right.
If the Shadows strike now, so they did need to keep things quiet until they'd built up enough strength to fight. And actually, this is, I mentioned, there was a Colin mentions there was about the Polish intelligence having the Enigma machine.
Yeah.
In some way, it's similar in Babylon 5. The Narn are in many ways like that. They have their Enigma. The way to beat the Shadows is in Jakar's Holy Book.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the Book of Shaquan. Yeah.
And it's, in some ways, when you look back on history and you see events that led to wars, that if one thing was done, could you have prevented it, or would it have made it worse? Had Dean Arn been listened to, it would have been just the same as if Sheridan had been allowed to continue with Morden. It would have forced the Shadows out, and things would have been worse.
Yeah, a lot worse. Well, that's one of the things about this episode, because this is almost like this is the prelude to the war. In a manner of speaking, this whole season is the prelude, but this episode right here really brings into sharp contrast just how dire and just how dangerous things are right now for everyone, in particular with the Alliance. And just how dangerous. I mean, this is the first time we get the monologue by Delenn about the first ones and the first war with the Shadows and everything, or the first series of wars with the Shadows. And it's just like when she says the Shadows were old even when the Ancients were young, and you're thinking, okay, the Shadows were like the first of the first ones. Holy crap! And they weren't always. Well, we find out later that they weren't necessarily evil per se, but they had a very different philosophy about how things should be done than everyone else. And that's what makes them antagonistic. But, the other... Go ahead, Elysium.
Now, I was just thinking there in this episode also the mention of, and I know it was mentioned at the very start of the episode, the refugee situation.
Yes.
From the war. And I was just thinking about, from my own family history, going back years, there was a case where the British attacked and 1,000 of them left their home area, and of that, 16 survived. Because they had to be refugees, they marched along, they were attacked by our own people and by the English along the way. And so the idea of refugees resonates a lot with me, even though that is many generations past. You do see how terrible it is for those people. And the problem that they faced along the way is many of the people they had to go through or pass through were in just as bad a situation. And if they'd have stopped to help, they could have been killed.
Yeah.
They could have starved. They didn't have the food to share. And so it was a terrible situation. And that's like the war. Babylon 5 does not have the resources. And it leads to terrible things. I know Sheridan says, I'm not going to leave people. And I like the way he said people, not the Narns, he said people. I'm not going to leave those people die cold and alone. And was it cold and alone on the steel floor or
on the deck?
Those effect on the deck.
Right.
And yet, had he tried to help everyone, the station didn't have the resources. And it's like, more people would have died. They couldn't have helped anyone beyond a certain point. They would have just made the situation worse. So sorry, that was just another element of this episode that was really powerful and tied in with the Shadow. That when Delenn couldn't say anything, that would have gotten help for the Narn. And those refugees are there because she could say nothing. But because she said nothing, at least those refugees were there. Otherwise, they would have been wiped out.
Essentially, yes. Yeah, because the war between the Narn and the Centauri is an outgrowth from everything else that's going on currently, and that's the unfortunate thing. And I just want to bring up this comment that Colin put in here. It does get very interesting towards the end of the Shadow War when they are made to think that they think about both their viewpoints in the Vorlons. Neither were truly evil; both were just stuck in their ways. And in a manner of speaking, yes, Colin, that's very true. And we'll get to that in due time and everything. But the problem is for Sheridan, he's got tunnel vision in this episode. All he cares about is finding out what happened to his wife, and that's an understandable position to have.
Yes.
but it blinds him to everything else. It blinds him to his duty in terms of how him and Garibaldi are interacting, even how him and Zach Allen interact. It blinds him to how him and Ivanova relate to one another, and it even relates. Well, once he finds out as she said, as Lynn says, you will never sleep well again after you learn learn the great, terrible truth of our age. And he's like, holy crap, I almost got everybody on this station killed. And he's like, I'm the one in charge. I'm the one that's responsible for these people. And it's amazing to me that, well, it's not amazing because I have done this in my own life on occasion. I've gotten tunnel vision to where everything else just doesn't matter, but it should.
Yes.
So,
actually, as I was looking at the episode, I was reminded of the story of Moses and Pharaoh. He was told, "Let my people go," and he didn't, and he got 12 plagues.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, that's pretty much what Sheridan was facing if he said, "No, I'm not going to let him go." Plague after plague would have struck until not just the firstborn, but everyone would have been killed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect way of looking at it. It parallels it completely in that situation. Sheridan was just so caught up in his own personal battle here that it's like you got to get at some point you have to have that. They have to have that intervention. There has to be that intervention, and that at that point it's like such a good thing, that Kosh is there, right? I mean, when you guys agree that Kosh, it's essentially like without that wake up call, had Sheridan just went about it his way, I think the Babylon 5 as a series would have ended a lot sooner.
yeah, because shadows win, everybody dies. And real quick to the chat, a good friend I haven't seen in a while, Moira Kitty. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good to see you. Hope you've been doing well. Thank you for popping in as always. So, but yeah, this was honestly, well, guys, this was a jam-packed episode, and well, I think honestly, I think for a lot of people, this is a fan favorite episode because it does a lot of. Sorry, Moira. Miss Kitty. Okay, now it sounds like the character from Gunpowder. But I think the reason this one is a fan favorite is because of we get that one brief moment of world building with that scene with Delenn and Kosh and Sheridan.
Yes.
We learn about the shadows. We learn about the other first ones. I know they probably didn't have the budget for it, but I would have loved to have seen just even maybe a small little snippet just showing like the first war with the shadows when all the ancients were fighting against the shadows, and just see how tremendous of a conflict that would have been. Just a little something like 30 seconds or 2 minutes, something. Just have her doing the voiceover, and that would have been it would have given a little bit extra, showing this army of the ancient the first ones fighting against the shadows, and just like, holy crap, this is like the Silmarillion for Lord of the Rings. You've got the elves fighting against Morgoth, and just like, holy crap, this is so epic and so huge and so great, and I love it. But I think also the great thing about this is the moral dilemmas of dealing with Franklin's situation and with Sheridan dealing with Morden and all the implications that come from that as well. I think that's one of the other great strengths of this episode. So.
And the first appearance of the Night Watch, where you really see the answer kind of starting to spread within the station.
Yeah, and we didn't really get into that, and I do feel a little bad. So if you guys don't mind, just for a few minutes, we can talk about that particular plot point, because Classic really hit it very, very well. This is almost like the Ministry of Peace sounds like something from 1930s Germany or from communist Russia or something like that. And it's all sounds so innocent, yet at the same time it sounds insanely insidious. Because
Yes.
we don't want people to think or say the wrong things so that the society can be okay. And I'm thinking, this sounds like 1984, and I don't want anything of it. And get the hell off my station.
What's the thing? Peace can be broken with a gun, a word, an idea, even a thought. That's terrifying.
Yes.
Especially when you have telepaths who can read your mind sitting in the room as you're saying that. That is a scary thing where they're really letting the people in the room know, we will know your thoughts. You better be on board.
You want to know my thoughts? I'll tell you right to your face, and I'll have.
That's why it's like the whole idea of the thought police. Mm-hmm. I think is the most terrifying thing. I mean, would you want to be in a room with a telepath? Because here's the thing about thoughts: you could think about something without even really controlling it. Sometimes a thought will just pop into your head. It's just something that that you thought of, and so for that to be such a huge subject to where it can get you in trouble or it can create a problem. Yeah, that's absolutely terrifying.
God, any poor telepath that tried to get into my mind would go crazy.
Yeah, I don't. If we actually were to put the real world that we're living in into it, yeah, it would be it would be crazy. I think the thought police would retire after a while.
You'd see them sitting at the bar next to Vera nursing a rather large glass of whiskey, going, "Oh God."
Well, the other thing is eventually the Ministry of Information, the Ministry of Peace, and the Night Watch, they get shown for what they are. But the problem is people to a degree are okay with it. And that's
that's the big issue. It's like it's like what you were saying, how it starts off. It's just a nice thing, couple extra credits a week just to be a part of this little organization that seems nice, that seems sweet, but ultimately, has nefarious purposes in the end. So it's,
Yeah, indeed.
I'm just wondering if you're in a world where there's war going on and you're thinking, hey, these guys can help. And also, it's just kind of parallels here with what happened last week. I mentioned that I was offended on for Delenn because of the way the reporter spoke to her. Now, those questions had to be asked, but because I cared about the character, I was willing to no, you can't dig for the truth. That's Delenn. The same in this episode with the Night Watch. We know they're bad, but would you have joined? And also with Sheridan. We know Morden's a weasel. And we know Sheridan's a good guy. So Garibaldi tried to call him out and resigned because he wouldn't go along with what Sheridan wanted. But were we okay? I mean, we were looking at a bad guy being caught. Would you have gone along? And I have to answer myself, I don't know. Would I have been okay if the episode hadn't ended the way it did? Would I have supported Sheridan? Yeah, that guy was bad. He was right to hold him up because he's the good guy. And that's dangerous because, yes, Morden needed to be stopped, but he was doing, and that would be the right thing. but he was doing it for all the wrong reasons, and it would have been so much worse.
Yeah, and it's hard to think about it. If you think about it in terms of that world, it's like, yeah, if we're on the station and you have to, you have to pick, you kind of have to pick a side. You have to decide where you're gonna be there in that situation. It is really, really difficult. I agree with you 100%. I don't know how I would have reacted if I was actually in that situation. It's easy when you're on the outside watching a show, like you said, where it's clearly identified who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, who you're actually supposed to be rooting for. But yes, in a real world situation, but also too, it becomes political in a sense too, because like like what you just pointed out, like if you're on board the station and you support Sheridan and you support what Sheridan's doing, and you're standing behind the commander or the captain, you're gonna make your decisions based off of a sort of political partisanship in a way. So you're going to make your decision based off of, oh, I know Sheridan, he's a good guy, he's making this decision because he believes it's the right one, so we need to support him. Or are you gonna side with the other ambassadors on the station and be like, well, listen, Morden needs to be released. It also really all depends on where you are on board the station at that point in time. But I'm with you. I don't really know what side I would be on if I were on board Babylon 5 at that time. And yeah, Night Watch, it has this it kind of has this like little appeal the way it initially came out, and it's like you're seeing these the armbands, and you're just kind of like, okay, history is repeating itself here. So I don't know if I would have joined Night Watch. I think I would have been a little bit I would have been critical of Night Watch, and I would be a little bit leery of Night Watch. But as far as siding with Sheridan over, the ambassadors on the station about Morden, I don't know. I don't know where I would be. That's a tough one. That is a tough one, and I think it would depend on my relationship with Sheridan on board this station. Trying to look at it from a personal perspective. I don't know. That is a tough one. Wow. Yeah.
It's like Veer's talk when he was talking with Londo about eddies and currents, about that which will destroy us. They both look the same. You don't know the way to victory and the way to destruction look exactly the same, or you know what I'm saying? You can't tell the difference. What might destroy you looks like it might be easy. What could save you looks difficult, or they look the same. You can never tell.
Exactly, and you look at where and in the chat where Colin is saying you just have to follow Zach to see how that goes. In relation to the Night Watch, yeah, he's looking at it like a lot of people on board the station would be looking at it essentially like, oh, this is nothing. This is just a little organization. They're just trying to help, But I don't know. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'd be. I think I would be at odds with the Night Watch. I don't think I would really be too thrilled about them. Even as them initially looking like they're here to help, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're coming up on an hour, and it doesn't feel like it's been an hour.
Yeah.
So, any final closing thoughts or anything before we wrap up?
I was just thinking that slap that Tally Winters gave Sheridan, that was real.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't duck back in time, and she hit him full on. JMS was mentioning, we didn't even have to add sound effects. That was the sound of that on the episode was the sound of the real slap.
Mm-hmm.
That slap was awesome. That's and because to me it felt very, very natural.
I would agree.
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't know. I guess we all have to disagree with the earlier video on that.
Oh, classic. Well,
Slightly,
you can
slightly, because Classic made a lot of great points, but I don't know. The slap to me just felt legitimate.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
To be honest, I would have backed away too if I saw hands coming from me. So you're both right. He was backing away from it.
A very human reaction, by the way.
And folks, I am going to include the link to Classic's commentary on this episode if you catch us on the replay, you want to know. And even just go subscribe to Classic's channel, because he does do a really good job over on his channel. He just recently did a review of the latest Batman and Catwoman comic and everything, and he had a lot of good thoughts in there and everything. So go give him a sub and go check him out, because he does good work on his channel, and I highly recommend him. I do. I'm not just saying that because I work with the guy, manner of speaking, but because Classic is good people. He has a good mind and everything, and I respect him a lot. And I know a lot of people here do as well. So, and obviously go subscribe both to Mr. Zyrider and Mountains and everything. They both deserve your support as well, and they're good people, and I'm glad to call them my friends here. So, and like I said, here is the link to Classic's video and his channel. So anyway, well, folks, I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. To Colin P. Smith, Bureau 31, Fiona Wolf. I know she had to leave early and she was having some tech issues. Thank you all very much for being here this afternoon. And of course, Myra Kitty, thank you for popping in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. And good to see you, Miss, as always. So, just a quick update. I almost forgot. Superior Hero Reviews was here earlier during the stream as well. I will be over there later this evening at 6 p.m. Central Time. We're going to be talking about the animated films of The Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman, and that'll be over on Classic, over on Superior Hero Reviews. So, and coming up tomorrow afternoon, going to be back with another afternoon stream because, well, we'll have a busy night as it is. I'm going to be doing another watch party review for the latest episode of The Mandalorian Season 2, The Tragedy.
When are you doing that?
Tomorrow afternoon, 4:30.
Okay, cool.
So, I'm not going to have time to do it tonight because I got to work in the morning. So, but I will say this is my completely spoiler-free critique. It was awesome. I love it, and I can't wait to watch it again. So, anyways, folks, thank you all again for being here. I hope you all have a great night and a great weekend. I will see you all tomorrow afternoon. And until next time, this is the Ambassadors signing off.